So, have you ever wondered what makes a 500-page academic book written over 30 years ago a timeless masterpiece? That's what we're looking at today with Gordon Wenham's commentary on Genesis. We're going to dive into why this book isn't just some dusty classic for scholars, but really a vital guide for anyone trying to get their head around one of the most important texts in history.
Now, to really get Wenham's genius, you have to start with the fundamental problem of Genesis. I mean, what is it? Is it a history book, a collection of myths, or something else entirely? And look, this isn't just some dry academic question. It's the tension that has defined how people have read this book for centuries, and it's the exact problem Wenham set out to solve.
Before Wenham came along, you were pretty much forced to pick a side. In one corner, you had the harmonizers. These were folks who tried to make every single detail in Genesis fit perfectly with modern science and history, often twisting the text into a pretzel to do it. And in the other corner, you had the literary critics, who saw it as beautiful, powerful fiction, but with basically zero connection to what actually happened. Wenham looked at those two options and said, nope. He carved out a third way.
And this, right here, is where Wenham completely changed the game. His big idea was this: you absolutely cannot and you shouldn't try to separate the history in Genesis from its powerful theological message. For him, they were totally intertwined, two sides of the very same coin. He gave his approach a name, historical groundedness. And the idea is actually pretty simple, but it's really profound. The theological message of Genesis, all its big ideas about God and humanity, aren't just abstract concepts. Wenham argued that their power is directly tied to the reality of the events the book describes. You just can't have one without the other. This quote from him just nails it. A theological interpretation is vacuous if the events it interprets never occurred. Think about that word, vacuous, empty. He's saying the meaning of Genesis isn't just floating around in the clouds somewhere. It's rooted firmly in the soil of real historical events. Here's a great way to think about it. The theological truths of Genesis are like a house, and the historical events, well, that's the foundation. You can admire the beautiful architecture and the paint all you want, but if you dynamite the foundation, the whole house just crumbles. That, in a nutshell, is the core of Wenham's entire argument. Okay, so that's the big theory, right? But what does it actually look like when you apply it to the text? Well, let's take a look at Wenham's analysis of the story of Joseph, because this is where his method just really comes alive. Right off the bat, Wenham throws a curveball. He says that calling it the Joseph story is just wrong. It's a misnomer. He basically says, hey, we've all been calling it the wrong thing this whole time. He points out that the text itself in the original Hebrew calls this section the family history of Jacob. Now that might sound like a tiny, picky detail, but it changes everything. It means the story isn't just about Joseph's amazing journey from a pit to a palace. It's about the entire family. And crucially, it shines a massive spotlight on the transformation of his brother Judah. And this is where it gets really, really cool. Wenham uncovers this stunning literary pattern in the story. Just look at this for a second. The whole narrative is a perfect mirror image of itself. You see how Joseph becoming a slave in part A is perfectly mirrored by his brothers coming to him for grain in A time? His time in prison is mirrored by their second trip. It's this incredible, sophisticated literary design that shows the two halves of the family moving in completely opposite directions. So what's the big deal about spotting that structure? Well, here's the payoff. It proves at the emotional high point, when Joseph reveals himself and everyone's crying. That's actually not the true climax of the story. The real climax, the moment the entire structure has been building towards, is Jacob's final testament in chapter 49, where all 12 sons are finally brought together and their future destiny is laid out. It totally reorients how you read the end of the book. Wenham was also a master at spotting these deep, echoing themes. Check this out. Years after Jacob deceived his own father, Isaac, using the skin of a goat kid, his own sons, led by Judah, deceive him about Joseph's fate using, you guessed it, a goat kid. That is absolutely not a coincidence. The author is showing us how sin and deception ripple down through the generations. But, no classic is perfect. And to really appreciate what Wenham did, we have to be honest about its limitations, especially now that we're looking back on it 30 years later. And the biggest challenge is, well, a pretty simple one. The book is over 30 years old, and in the world of biblical scholarship, archaeology, and literary studies, 30 years is a long, long time. So where do we see some of those gaps? Well, for one, while he totally opened the door on understanding Judah's character arc,
Later scholars have walked through that door and developed it even further. His discussion of mysterious figures like the angel of the Lord can feel a little thin by today's standards. And of course, the big one. 30 years of new archaeological finds, especially in Egyptology, means some of his historical connections are just, well, they're dated. So if it's outdated in parts, you might be asking, why are we still talking about it? Because here's the thing, despite its age, Wenham's commentary remains an absolute, indispensable masterpiece. And hey, that's not just me saying that. The scholarly consensus is crystal clear. It's been called the most ambitious and most significant evangelical commentary on Genesis produced in the 20th century. You really can't get higher praise than that. And honestly, it's earned. At the end of the day, Wenham's core strengths are exactly what make this book a classic. His powerful argument for why history is essential for theology is just timeless. His literary breakdown of the Joseph story is still the gold standard that everyone else is measured against. And maybe most importantly, he created a whole new model for how scholars could approach the Bible with both critical rigor and genuine faith, setting a new bar for everything that came after. And all of this leaves us with a really big, interesting question, doesn't it? Wenham's work shows us that even the most brilliant classics eventually show their age. So how should we engage with them? How do we learn from a masterpiece that is both completely essential and, at the same time, a little bit out of date? It's a challenge not just for reading Genesis, but for learning from any foundational text in any field.